Welcome to Bharat Shakti. I'm Ramananda Sengupta. Our very special guest today wears several hats. After a stint teaching English at Hindu College, she went on to study conflict, particularly the two world wars and their impact on the world that we live in today. She's also a singer, songwriter, composer, and her songs reflect the heroism, the horrors, and the social impacts of the very various wars that we have fought. I'm delighted to welcome Vanita Singh. Thank you so very much for joining us, ma'am. It's a delight to have you with us. You know, I've been waiting for this. I kept telling you that I was looking forward to this. Before we sort of, start the whole discussion, I was just trying to understand that, there's so many things that you have done in terms of your songs. Where is this coming from? What sparked this whole thing?
What sparked it was has to do with influences in my early childhood. When I was 4 years old, I was exposed to the Artificial Limb Center in Pune, where my mother took me. And I remember seeing all these prosthetic limbs, and I just thought, so many limbs virtually from ground level to the ceiling. What does that mean? And I became aware then of what seemed to be an imminent duality in war, the glory and the grief. So what lies behind all these battles? And my father used to narrate his experiences in the Second World War, during the Burma campaign, when he was a doctor in the Army Medical Corps, in the British Indian Army. His ID was MR174. Oh. His family was in Memeo and Rangoon, and they walked over the jungles to India from Memeo and Rangoon and came to Dimapur on foot.
Wow, that's a long walk.
Yes, and my father mentioned, and I read it in the Royal College of Physicians, the archives in Edinburgh, that he helped save lives from cerebrospinal fever with a simple sulfonamide tablet dissolved in distilled water. Every life was always important for him, and I sort of seemed to imbibe that awareness that lives are very precious and we have to look after soldiers, their families, and help save lives. And later, in the Sino-Indian War in 1962, he was able to diagnose and treat our troops suffering from high-altitude pulmonary edema. And it was relatively unknown until 1937 in the world as we know it, because it was discovered then in the Peruvian Andes. And this played a very important part in my consciousness, because I did see the battle casualties in the base hospital, Delhi Cant, rows upon rows of wounded, heavily bandaged soldiers stricken by high-altitude pulmonary edema and frostbite, and I have that impression with me all the time. It's indelibly impressed on my consciousness. And therefore wanted to, when I thought of writing these ballads and composing the marches, it had to be human-centric songs and marches of valor and sacrifice. Not much is really known about our soldiers in the world outside India. And we ourselves have some ambiguity about our soldiers. Now the world wars, I see time as a continuity, and I see it as change as well. And I started reading the histories at a very early age of the legends of World War I and II, and our soldiers played such an important part in Europe. And we were then at Raksha Bhavan when we were posted to Delhi after the Pune cantonment, and my everyday pilgrimage was to the Memorial Arch at India Gate, where the battles are inscribed. And so this is in my mind. And the Second World War, because my father's experiences which he narrated, that made an impact on me. And saw war as something which is necessary for armies. Readiness is all, because the enemy never sleeps. At the same time, it's necessary to build bridges, and you have to restart your life. So I was used to the idea of refugees, displaced people. And so that's really what is behind my songs.
What a fascinating story. You know, you mentioned prosthetic limbs, and then I think one of the songs that I think was played at the Beating the Retreat ceremony.
The
January,
Kargil 1999 march.
That's right. I think it was co-written by somebody whom I admire a lot, General Cardozo.
Yes, Major General.
You know,
Cardozo.
he also has a lot to do with prosthetic feet, and I think
Yes.
he was the first disabled soldier to actually have a command.
Yes,
I
differently
remember
able
interviewing him
soldiers.
often, and even now, you know, he keeps sending me messages on New Year's Eve and saying, "God bless you" and stuff like that. One of my heroes, if you ask me. He's,
Yes,
you know,
mine too. And I had an instant magnetic empathy with his poetry. And he gave me his Marigold poems, the anthology, to read. And one by one, I set them to music and sang his poems as ballads in the folk tradition. Now, why do I choose the folk tradition? Because the folk tradition of music is simple. It lends itself to commemoration and shared sentiments and to narrative storytelling. So there's always a story behind the face that you see, whether it's a soldier in uniform, whether it's their families. And the acoustic guitar lends itself very happily to folk instrumentation. And for the march, I was able to use the synthesizer and combine Indian folk rhythms with the military march beat.
I had actually, you know, toyed with the idea of suddenly putting a guitar in front of you and saying, "Sing." But I think what I'll let you do instead is to sort of, you know, perhaps decide some poems that you feel are really powerful enough from your point of view, written by you. Maybe you'd just like to either, you know, you could sing it or you could just
I think I'll just recite a little
yes,
bit of
because otherwise, you know, we'll have to put up
the
the
song,
music.
yes, Casualties of War, which I wrote.
Sure.
And the memories I just told you about, my childhood in the Pune cantonment and the Sino-Indian War, and even what goes on every day when we look at social media and we see troops deployed in counterinsurgency operations, Poonch Rajouri. So this is really what was in my mind and is in my mind a lot. I remember that winter betrayal of 1962 and the hospital ward with row after row of wounded, heavily bandaged soldiers scourged by pulmonary edema and frostbite on high-altitude battlefields that took very many lives. The memories stayed with me all my life, and there's a familiar pain that still knots up inside when there's news of continuing casualties to this day from arbitrary, hubristic lines that divide and border wars along them. More lives are lost every other day, taken for granted because there are more of them to be deployed out there. They go willingly from a sense of pride in doing their frontline duty day and night. But just put a face to the lads who have died. Do you see an aging mother, a father, a sweetheart, a wife, a son, a daughter, a sister, a brother? They're to get on with their lives as best as they can with a flaming memory of what they prized. And the faces that stare at you from the internet in their uniforms smile affably with an artless innocence of faith in their chosen path, onward to glory, often mowed down in their prime, much, much before their time.
Wow.
So this is
Wow.
a bit of that.
Now, I'm going to take that to a friend of mine who's, what he describes himself as a Fauji brat.
Yes.
But one of his laments was that, the Indian Army is like God, you only remember it when you're in trouble.
People do tend to.
But I think you are sort of almost disproving that in some ways. You're trying to disprove that. That, we should remember them on a routine basis, because otherwise all these people who are forgotten, I don't think their memories have been in vain. I think they've died for a cause, or what they believe was a cause.
Of course. And that's the whole thing about the Indian Army. The majority of our soldiers are tough, simple folk from all the four corners of India.
Mm-hmm.
And so are the officers who lead them always from the front, and they inspire them to repel overwhelming attacks, however massive they are and wherever they may be, and to defend our extensive restive borders. That's how it was when I was growing up, and that's how it seems to be even now, when
That's
you
true.
see what's going on
You know,
along the borders.
I remember when I first approached you for this interview, I was told that you were very busy composing songs for the 1971 wars, I think. Is what, the 52nd or 53rd?
1971, and
yeah, so it's some anniversary that we're celebrating. But, you know, of late, given the recent developments in Bangladesh, for instance,
yes.
I've often wondered whether, you know, our soldiers died in vain.
No, I don't think our soldiers died in vain. People might have forgotten the role they played. It was such a complicated situation. It was a humanitarian situation, 10 million refugees pouring across our borders, and 3 million people were dead over there, back from where they came. And it was a war for us, for India, on two fronts.
Right.
And why did 3 distinguished corps of the Indian Army go into battle on the Eastern Front in a 13-day fierce war from December 4? Now, what was the whole war for? Was it a principled humanitarian intervention with so many people just pushed out, and the catastrophes that were going on, the killings? Was it for the victory of democracy over military rule? Was it the victory of humanism over barbarism? The victory of liberation over occupation? These are the words of the then Major Tank Commandant. 65th Cavalry, was it, that went in?
Possibly, no.
Now Lieutenant General Shami Mehta, Independent Tank Squadron. And the question is, what happened? Who do you wait for deliverance? Do you take action, or do you just dither, or do you look to the United Nations? And the questions remain, as they remain now for some of the conflicts that are ongoing. What happened to the campaign of genocide? Did the United Nations respond? What happened to the elimination of democratic rights? Did the United Nations respond? What happened to the millions of people driven from their homes? Did the United Nations respond? These are the lyrics of my ballad, To the March. And I feel that our soldiers went in for a good cause. And we were actually, I think, quite isolated at that time, because the world didn't sit up. But the world tends to ignore what isn't purely in its own self-interest most of the time. So we did the right thing, even though there was such a cost to the war, and so many lives lost, so many maimed, disabled, blinded.
I recall Jacob, General JFR Jacob. He's a very close friend of mine, actually. I mean, people say, how can you call him a friend? But that's his inscription on his book that he wrote to me.
Yes.
And at the same time, I also had the privilege of interviewing Admiral Nanda.
I see, yes.
You know.
Another hero.
And both these people had this impression that, you know, this war was very necessary. I mean, and I think both of them came to fame, for want of a better word, because of these wars in many ways, you know. But there are also other generals.
Yes.
You know, there was a general called General Thapan,
Yes.
who said, why did we even get involved in all this? Not our problem.
Oh, it was very much a problem for us with so many refugees. 10 million isn't a small figure at all. And
No, his argument was that, you know, that you're talking 10 million, but the number of illegal refugees now is more than that. So what was the point? That was his argument. I'm not saying I agreed with him. He felt that we shouldn't have intervened in Sri Lanka, we shouldn't have intervened in Bangladesh, that we should stay out of other people's problems. It's only if we get invaded that we should react. That was his argument. But I think I agree with you that what we did was right. I mean, we did it despite a lot of odds.
yes, overwhelming odds. At Sylhet, for instance, and how the army crossed the Meghna at night, what was going on. We just couldn't ignore it.
Mhm.
And I think our Prime Minister was extremely brave at that time. She took a decision. And,
So, you've sung at various places. I understand you were also featured on Radio Tashkent.
yes, it was just a small...
Was that a military thing or
No,
was that
no,
something
no, it
else?
wasn't. I didn't sing my own songs then. I only started writing them after 2019.
Okay.
And that was actually because of a personal trauma I had, a deep loss. My mother died in unfortunate circumstances. And that's how I started.
So
I
is
think
this
she inspired me, and my parents are behind my songs as well. And all the soldiers, I grew up with the Gorkha families and close bonds with them, happy, affable, proud, heroic, transgenerational, regimental traditions.
Oh yes,
So
I mean, my school in Darjeeling, it used to be part of a volcano, and half of it was 11 Gurkhas and half of it was our school. So we had a lot of interactions with those people. They were some of the bravest people I've ever met.
Yes, I think so.
Really. But is it true that a Gurkha regiment cannot be led by a Gurkha?
Why?
I keep hearing that all the time, and I'm not sure, whether that's the correct thing.
No, I don't see why not. They're disciplined, they're obedient, they're loyal.
Mhm.
And it's good leadership that counts, isn't it?
I mean, I've heard that, that you normally put a non-Gurkha in charge of Gurkha regiments, while a Gurkha can go and lead other regiments, but not a Gurkha regiment.
Well, I wouldn't know because I don't take those decisions, but I don't see why not. All our troops are trained to be disciplined and loyal, and the country comes first always, and their lives don't really matter because it's a country, and if you make the supreme sacrifice in your line of duty, then that's what matters. And the welfare of your soldiers is next, and your own is last of all. You don't think of yourself really.
So, the reason why I brought that up was that, you've sung in various places, what I see like I said, on radio, on television,
at university festivals,
at universities,
at India International Center, occasionally.
Yes.
Much earlier.
So, are these meant for the common man, or are they meant for the Fauji crowd?
Well, the songs that I do and the marches are meant for families of army, the armed forces, their families, and also for ordinary people, the average human being who might have an interest in his fellow beings, and also for an international audience, because they really aren't aware of what our army is all about, the battles that our army has fought. And I keep hearing, India needs to cut down on its defense spending, but which other country has such a long border, and we are surrounded on all sides with uncertainty.
Absolutely.
So the army is a very important part, and it's one of the finest institutions of India, to my mind. And they defend us, they let us sleep in peace. They fight against so many overwhelming odds. At Regimental, for instance, the 13th Kumail C Company. How did they go in indefensible terrain? They were located with poor approaches, and ammunition was antiquated. They were not clothed properly, summer clothing, canvas shoes,
I remember,
and no reserves. And then they were left to fend for themselves. And it was such heavy odds against so many Chinese, and the waves of attacks they came. But they just went all out, and they were so brave, superhumanly heroic, I think. Each one, there's group heroism to think about, and there's individual heroism, and they seem to just be there all the time, so many battles. But
we are running out of time, but I wanted to ask you one last question, or rather, maybe two brief questions, perhaps. One is that, you said that you're doing this for an international audience as well.
yes.
How do you reach out to them?
Well, it's actually through people that we've known, and wherever they may be. WhatsApp is very convenient, email is also, and I've got them interested in Indian history, military history, and they say, they're very appreciative. They said, we really didn't know. And so the story goes around, and the commemoration. And I think it's good for India because nobody else seems to be doing these songs.
Absolutely,
and marches.
yes.
And since it is human-centric, I think it's something that I always wanted to do for the soldiers and for the army, and I'm doing my little bit for them. And I think it's important to remember. So just like we have this arch in India Gate, later I was able to trace the links with other commemorative monuments, the Chhatri Memorial in Brighton, and the Walking Cemetery in Surrey, and also the Medin Gate at Ypres, where our soldiers were brought from battlefields.
So my last question to you would be that, you know, while you're doing this out of your own sort of volition and your own internal dynamics,
Yes.
would you like to tell us about one particular event or a reaction from somebody which really made you feel that, okay, whatever I'm doing is sort of, you know, justified in that? Anybody who said something, came out and said, you know what, I've heard your song, I loved it, that kind of a thing?
Well,
I'm sure there might be many, but you know, I'm just thinking of perhaps a non-foreign.
Okay, I'll just tell you. There was a reaction from a person who said, why do you keep writing about death all the time? Isn't there something else that you can sing about? So I said, yes, but I said, death needn't be seen negatively. For instance, the Ballad of Vikram Batra, it's a celebration of his life, all that he stood for and what he did eventually. And so people come round to saying, oh, I see. Now we have an awareness of what it's all about. So it's not just death, it's glory as well. And this is moving, really. That was the sort of reaction that stood out.
That's I mean, that's the kind of stuff that makes you take in some
ways. It makes you feel good.
Well, with that, we must, you know, bring this particular thing to an end. I look forward to having you again one of these days.
Thank you so much. Time has flown, just talking to you, being here.
And, you know, the other thing is that I wanted to wish you all the very best. I think you're doing a really stupendous
Thank you so much
thing in a
for
world that really needs it.
And support.
You know?
Thank you.
So thank you, and I look forward to having you again. That was Vanita Singh, singer, songwriter, composer, who reminds us of the sacrifices made by our braves, who reminds us of the horrors, the heroics, the terror, and the incredible amount of bravery and sacrifice involved. I do hope you enjoyed this particular edition of Bharat Shakti's videos, and I look forward to having you again. Till then, this is Ramananda Sengupta signing out.